Hi everyone. So in today's video, we are going to create the polyfill for bind method in JavaScript. So if you have not watched my call and apply polyfill video, I will encourage you to check that out. So bind is similar to call and apply. The difference is while call and apply execute a function immediately, bind returns as a function that we can call later in our code as and when we want. So if I just show you how the native bind function works, then we will create our own implementation of bind. So let's see. I will create two objects with a property name, and inside the second object I will have another function, print name, that will do nothing but just console.log. My name is this.name. And if I now use bind, so we can say something like obj2 dot print name, that is a function on which we want to apply bind. I will say dot bind, and I will pass in the object with whose reference I want to bind this function. So I want to bind this function with object1. So you see we are using this keyword here. So this basically references the current object, right? So I'm by using bind, I'm changing the object for this. So now bind returns as a function that I will collect. I will say const func is equal to, and now I can say function and I can call it. So if I just quickly run this, you see we are getting my name is Bhavuk. Even though we are calling obj2.printName, this function we are calling, but upon this.name, when this gets executed, this is taking the context of the first object. Let's say I directly execute this function obj2.printName, and I will just comment this out. You see we are getting my name is Rohan, because by default this print name function is taking the this context of this object, but using bind we can change that context. I hope you understand it by now. So if we want to implement something like this, how we can do that, let's see. I will say Function.prototype.myBind. This will be a function that will take an object as a context and some arguments. So inside this I will say let function is equal to this, because we are using this function.prototype, so we are getting the function using this. But first let me check if the type of object is not equal to an object, or the type of this, basically I will move this up, and if the type of function is not equal to function, then I will throw an error. Like this I will throw an error. So whenever we are using our custom bind, so first we'll check like whatever object or context we are passing, it should be an object. Another thing, that we should be running this bind this over a function, right? So we are checking for that. And now I'll say return a function that will take some arguments. So we have args already defined, so instead of this I will say new args, and inside this I will say object dot func is equal to function object dot func call with args comma new args. So when we will use this myBind, I will show you how these arguments and new arguments are working, right? Once we have ran this function, we also want to delete obj.func from this object, because we are inserting it inside this object as a key. So we want to remove that as well, and I will show you why, right? Okay, so first let's see if this is working or not. So we have two objects that we have created, and I will say const myFun is equal to obj2 dot print name dot bind, and I will bind it with object 1. Okay, and I will say myFun and I will call it. Okay, so as you can see, we are getting my name is Bhavuk, right? Because we are passing in the context of this object that we have created. So this is bind and I will say my bind. Again, you see we are getting my name is Bhavuk, means that our custom polyfill is working fine. If I change the context here, and now if I run this, we are getting my name is Rohan. Cool. So now coming to these arguments and these new arguments. So you see on top level, we have this my bind function that is taking an object as an argument, and it can take some other parameters as well. So let's say I give a country to it, like this India. So this will go to this args, right? And this args will go to this function call. So in my function, if I say country, and if I print this country, let's see, we are getting my name is Rohan and India, right? So this is while we are binding our function with the object. So this is the args. But once we have called this, so this is returning us a new function that itself is taking some arguments. So that means this function that we are getting, this also can take some arguments. So if I pass it, let's say 10, and if I say country, comma people, so you can see on my right side, we are getting my name is Rohan, India and 10. So however, we are passing like this to the outer function and this to the function that is being returned. So we are collecting these arguments here, and we are calling this function like this print name function with two arguments that we are receiving from these things. I guess it is clear now. Okay, so now coming to this delete operator that I used, let's say I do console.log of obj1. If I pass the context as obj1 and we are using it. So like if we see the normal flow, we are injecting a new function inside my object1 that is basically running that function. So if I run this now, so as you can see, this object that we are getting, it only has a single property of name. That is, you can see here, object1 has only a single property because we are deleting. If we don't delete it, then if I run, you see in my object we are getting two properties now. One is name and one is function. But in the original object there is no function. We are just injecting that function here and we are calling that function using that context. But we don't need this function to permanently get stored in this object because it was not there initially. That's why we are doing this delete object.func so that it correctly deletes it after executing. I hope you understand it now. Okay, so now let's see the second way of creating this polyfill. For that, we will create a custom function custom bind, that will take a function, an object, and some arguments. So this will also be a quick revision for you for the bind method that we created. Firstly, what I'll do, so I will add some checks here like I did earlier. So if the type of object is not equal to object, or the type of function that we are getting is not equal to function, then I will throw, right? I will do something like this. And now I will return a new function, return function that will take some new arguments. And inside this, what I'll do, whatever object I'm getting, I will inject a new property inside it. That is the function that I'm getting. And I will call this function with args and new args, right? And I will delete later on obj.func, right? So I guess this is it. Now, if we check, so we have two objects as usual. If I now run this custom bind, so how I will do it, I will say custom bind. I will pass in the function. So the function is this print name function. How I will pass it is object 2.print name. What is the second parameter? Which is the context that I want to run this function in. So let's say object 1, and we are expecting some arguments. Let's say this time USA and 100. So this will return a function to us that we need to store somewhere. So I'll say const new function, and I will call this new function. Let's see if this is working. Okay, so we are getting my name is Bhavuk, that is coming from object 1, and USA and 100 that we are passing here. So as you can see, we have passed both the arguments while binding this object with this function and not here. So that is also acceptable. Whatever number of arguments we are passing here, that will go inside this, and if there are no new arguments, so that won't matter, right? So let's say I pass it here, that will also, if I give 1000 this time, so that will also work fine. So both the ways are correct. So that was how you can implement your own bind function. Firstly, by overriding the function.prototype, and secondly, by creating your own custom bind function from scratch. I hope you enjoyed watching this. Thanks a lot.